Good morning. I see some members of the public are joining us, so welcome to the 2023 Community Arts Grant Public Panel Meeting. Thanks for being here this morning. Before we get started, just a couple of reminders for any applicants who are tuning in. You are set to listen-only mode, so you won't be able to interact with us or with panelists during today's meeting. So you can see us, but we can't see or hear you. But if you do have any questions, then please feel free to reach out to me by email. I'll be trying to monitor that throughout the day. My email address is kmainer@cultureworks.org, and I'm the director of grant making here. So at this time, it's my pleasure to welcome CultureWorks President and CEO, Lisa Hanson, to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Karen. And good morning, everyone. We thank each of you for taking time out to join us today. I just want to take a moment to introduce the program for those of you that are not familiar. The Community Arts Grants provides general operating support to organizations that enrich and inspire the Dayton region through world-class performances, exhibitions, and acclaimed educational programs for all ages. The funding for this program comes from CultureWorks' community-wide fundraising initiative, the Campaign for the Arts. As stewards of community funds and in keeping with our commitment to transparency, CultureWorks relies on a grant panel of knowledgeable community members to evaluate applications for community arts grants and make funding recommendations. I'd like now to introduce the panelists and the staff. This year's Community Arts Grant panelists are, just give a little raise of your hand when I call your name. Era Beal, she is a theater practitioner, former executive director and nonprofit coach. Rachel Goodspeed, founder and principal consultant of Goodspeed Strategies. Erin Morgan Glenn Smith, associate professor of art, College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences at Central State University. The panel discussions will be facilitated by Stacy Lawson. She is the System Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer of Premier Health and also the Vice Chair of the CultureWorks Board of Trustees. Providing logistical support for today's meeting is CultureWorks team member Karen Maynor, and as she said, she is the Director of Grant Making. We would also like to thank this year's financial reviewers, Jim Coles and Dave Stacy, who supported the efforts of the grant panel by reviewing applicants' financial materials and providing a recommended financial health score for each application. Now, just a little bit about the grant making process. In the weeks leading up to today's meeting, panelists reviewed applications independently and completed initial scoring using an established 100-point scoring rubric. Today's meeting allows them the opportunity to provide valuable and specific feedback to the applicants and to hear other panelists' perspectives before finalizing their scores. Panelists will make their final scoring determinations by the end of today's meeting, and applicants must receive an average score of 70 points out of 100 to be eligible for funding. To determine grant amounts, final scores will be input into a funding formula, which also takes into account the number of applicants, each applicant organization's budget size, and the amount of funding available through the 2023 Campaign for the Arts, which ends June 30th. All applicant organizations will be notified of their final scores within a week following the panel meeting, and they will be notified of their funding amounts by mid-July, following the close of the campaign and approval of funding recommendations by the CultureWorks Board of Trustees. And at this time, I'd like to hand things over to our panel facilitator, Stacy Lawson. She will explain the structure of today's meeting. Stacy?
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm Stacy Lawson, and I have the pleasure of being here with each and every one of you this morning. During the public portion of today's meeting, grant panelists will discuss applications for community arts grant funding. These applications are divided into two categories. The general operating support category is for organizations with annual budgets between $500,000 and $10 million. And the Community Arts Development category is for organizations with annual budgets between $100,000 and $500,000. Prior to the panel meeting, panelists were asked to identify any potential conflict of interest with applicants. I think we've noted that before, but I think that bears repeating. In the event that a panelist has a conflict with any organization, they are instructed not to score that organization's application and not to participate in the discussion of that application. Please note that applicants and other audience members may only observe the meeting and will not be permitted to interact with panelists or to provide any additional information during the review process. The panel deliberations will proceed as follows. Panelists will first discuss applications one at a time for up to 15 minutes. And at the beginning of that discussion, any panelist who has identified a conflict of interest with the applicant organization will be temporarily removed, I got tongue twisted there, from the meeting. I will then call on the primary reviewer who will begin the discussion by presenting the strengths. They'll discuss the weaknesses of that application based on 3 very specific scoring categories. Those are artistic and cultural vibrancy, community impact and engagement, and then organizational capacity. Once that primary reviewer has concluded their remark, I'll then open up the floor to other panelists to add comments and discuss. After all panelists have had a chance to comment, I'll draw that discussion to a close, and each panelist will have a moment to adjust their scoring and take notes as needed. There will be a short break in the middle of the review of general operating support applications, and then a longer lunch break prior to the review of the community art development applications. Once that panel has discussed all applications, then we will enter a closed session. During that time, audience members will be asked to leave. During that closed session, panelists will have a final opportunity to revise their scores before submitting them to Culture Work staff. As a final note, the public portion of today's meeting will be recorded, and a recording will be available on the Culture Work website within a week.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa and Stacy. I think that you covered everything and all of the reminders. So I would say that we don't want to run too far ahead for those who are signing on just to hear their portion of the discussion. But as Stacy mentioned, we are recording. So I would say maybe we can give it just a couple minutes and then get started on the discussions.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, so we will start first with the Dayton Art Institute.
Okay, you want me to just go ahead and chime right in?
Yes, Aaron.
All right, thank you for your patience with me.
I'm sorry, Rachel. Does Rachel have a conflict of interest?
I think you need to move me to a.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yes. For attendees, if a panelist thank you. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will be temporarily removed from the meeting. So if you see people disappear for a time, that's what's happening.
Yeah, let me know when I can go.
I think she's been, I don't see, I think she has been removed. Is that correct, Karen?
Yep, you can go
Yes.
ahead.
Okay, you're good to go, Aaron.
All right, thank you. So regarding the, let's see, sorry, let me scroll back up. Artistic and cultural vibrancy of the Dayton Art Institute. I'll just go ahead and write what I wrote first and then add additional comments as needed. The DAI, specifically New Beginnings, sheds light on many aspects of Mexican and Native American cultures, including detailed research of the artists and their relationships with the remarkable figures, events, spiritual and religious values, and everyday experiences depicted in living color, texture, and forms. So What I witnessed from that specific exhibition was a variety, a very diverse variety of how the artists that came into contact with these cultures responded and were influenced, even in how they discuss basically how they took some of those influences and didn't really use them for negative gain, but for their own personal growth. So it's always nice to see when you can see through evidence of exhibitions like this, that people outside of that culture are taking those influences from the culture that they're observing and using them for, not for selfish gain, but for positive influence and impact, and recording them properly and not taking advantage. So I felt the sensitivity of that there. I would say regarding community impact and engagement, I'll read my comments that I wrote. I've witnessed firsthand on more than one recent occasion the collaborative efforts of the DAI within local community organizations, the efforts of encouraging college students, especially studio artists, to pursue their creative pursuits long-term is definitely felt through things such as the YEC program, which again is another thing that I was able to witness firsthand and see the diversity among that group as well. Let's see. And so I guess with that one specifically, I was really, I always enjoy any kind of program that specifically positively targets studio artists in a world of artificial intelligence. It's nice to see thriving programs that specifically support, more classically developed styles, hands-on work, having students do research and basically act in a very professional realm. Let's see, going down to organizational capacity. I didn't really, I guess, see much evidence of a whole lot of diversity among the staff and board, but then again, I don't know, maybe it's just because of the nature of art museums and things of that nature. Is still heavily, I don't want to say dominated, but definitely not dominated by the minority groups. But I think I see efforts in changing that, specifically at the Dayton Art Institute, efforts in increasing, or at least making a conscious effort to increase diversity amongst staff and board. So I'm definitely seeing and feeling that. And then regarding, again, organizational capacity, I just simply wrote the DAI has clearly stated financial operations that seem to be moving over time. That's pretty clearly stated, in, I guess, nothing too deep there for me. My final overall comment was the DAI is an organization that strives to provide quality art collections, educational resources, and inclusive programs that serve the broader community. It appears that over time, this will become recognized more and more as the efforts continue to pay off. So while we may not see extreme evidence walking through the Dayton Art Institute or most other art museums of heavy diversity, I would say that when you walk through the Dayton Art Institute, you feel the sense of diversity living there and being promoted more and more over time. That is all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. So at this time, I'm going to open the floor to the other panelists to add any comment that they would like to add.
The other panelist, yes, one of so overall, I'm going to start kind of with what I agreed with Erin on. I do have a couple points where I have a different take. So overall, this was a very strong application. I really appreciate their strategic plan in particular. They have very clear, measurable strategic goals that fit like little action, the actions fit with the overarching goal. They're realistic, they're consistent, they're moving, they have a clear direction. So I really appreciate that. It's not just a document. Obviously, it's not a document that's sitting on a shelf collecting dust, just sometimes happens with strategic plans. To that end, though, one of the things I would encourage the DAI to include in other grant applications, so it's not specifically asked for in the grant, but as Erin alluded to, art museums, particularly in buildings like the DAI, which is a fabulous old building, is not a place that historically is welcome for many people. Many people feel uncomfortable entering a space like that. But DAI is not the only place that's facing this. And so I am sure that there are some best practices out there for making spaces feel more inclusive. There was no reference to those larger environmental movements within the application. Instead, they talked about what they were doing and just even a nod towards what another institution is doing, and that they're using that to drive some of their decisions, I think would strengthen the application. And Erin raised her hand, so I'm gonna let her chime in.
I appreciate your additional feedback, and allow me to not be too personal here, but I did want to comment on something. I guess if we're talking about moving in a more inclusive direction, it's hard to not notice the African and Asian collections being on the lower floor. I always wondered if maybe that could be even a temporary adjustment, whereas maybe even if for a temporary time that collection gets moved to a higher location so it doesn't feel so second rate and kind of forgotten. Most people don't immediately walk in and go to the lower collections unless they're specifically going to see the student art, going to see, if their children are like involved. But I guess that would be a change that I would personally like to see. But again, I said, let me not get too personal, but I'm pretty one that feels that way.
No, I think that's a valid thing, right? Like sometimes just rearranging physical space really will adjust how welcoming something is and what priorities are. And when we talk about diversity and accessibility, I mean, there's also the fact that museums often have stuff hung at eye level for people who are standing on 2 full legs, and there are plenty of people who aren't experiencing museums that way. So the physical arrangement, I think, is a valid point, and I like the specificity of that, Erin. Thank you for. I do like, though, while we're talking about sort of diversifying and inclusion, I do like that one of their specific goals is to make sure that they are purchasing a certain percentage of the art they are purchasing and acquiring is by less represented artists. And I really appreciated that measurable, specific, intentional goal. Though I will say I had a very different reaction to the New Beginnings than Erin did. I was just in New Mexico actually not that long ago. And so I think that was something I certainly brought into the exhibit. And to me, the exhibit still felt very colonized. It still was white artists coming into other lands and their art. There were very few Indigenous artists represented. And I am, visual art is not, I'm a performing artist, not a visual artist. So I don't necessarily understand all the intricacies there, but I walked through the entire exhibit specifically looking for non-white artists and found very, very few. And I was sort of disappointed and frustrated by that. Go ahead, Erin.
Agreed. I guess so. When I was looking at the collection, yeah, I initially felt that as well. I was looking for names that felt Indigenous next to much of the art, and it did feel like visitors coming into a foreign land and kind of gathering their information, and then kind of creating what they felt from it. I guess in my case, even though it did feel colonized a bit, it felt like it was more on a slightly more sensitive level, like, actually paying attention to the intricacies of certain fabrics they wear, certain hairstyles, certain aspects of culture. But yeah, it did still feel like very much like people from the outside looking in And so I can't help but to agree with Ara on that. I think she's onto something, certainly.
Thank you.
And
I mean, it certainly didn't feel, it wasn't, you know, a lot of times we'll see representations of other cultures as sort of a characterized, I don't know if that's a word. And it didn't have that feel to it, but I still felt like there was some sort of lost opportunity. And I'll also acknowledge, like, I know the show was scheduled before the pandemic and it came back. And so like, there's lots of things going on, but I couldn't help but notice that. Some of the really good things though, that we've covered, maybe some of the missed opportunities. I was really drawn to this phrase that they use in their application. So some programs focus on reaching a wide audience for small encounters, while others serve a relatively small group with deep and meaningful interactions. And I really appreciate that. I think they understand where they fit in the larger ecosystem. It's something that we see in their community engagement, as Erin was sort of mentioning, something where the museum really is for everyone. So, you know, whether you're someone who just likes to look at art, but doesn't know your difference between watercolor and oil even, or whether, you know, you're an artist who's really looking to go sketch or to take a class or to have, you know, other things available to you. I think they are doing a really nice job of that, and of partnering with, I like that they, as they were trying to work on their diversity, I mean, I think they mentioned the show, and I can't remember exactly the name of the organization that specializes in African-American visual art in the area. I didn't even know that organization existed until I encountered it at the Dayton Art Institute. So I think that I like that they're going out to where these populations already are and trying to engage them, instead of, you know, trying to say, hey, we're cool, come play with us. I think I do really appreciate that approach about what they're doing.
Black heritage through visual rhythms was definitely a step forward in the right direction. So kudos to the team for accepting that. But that was also an example of the African-American perspective from African-Americans, which is why I think that show was very successful. And I saw that it was one of the more successful exhibits of the year. And I think it was felt that it came from the aspect of, this is being depicted from the people who are actually, you know, being represented in the work. And so I don't know, maybe something like that on other levels out, you know, with other cultures would be really helpful as well. Yeah. I digress.
I appreciate the discussion. Okay, so we're going to draw this portion to a close, give you all an opportunity to adjust your scores, take notes as needed. We've got a moment before we go on to the next one. Karen, I keep looking at you on the virtual panel just to make sure I'm following the format. Okay, good. Okay, I'll just give a few moments before we move on to the next. Okay, we're going to go on next to Dayton Contemporary Dance Company. And at this time, I will call on Ara, who will lead our discussion on that. Am I saying that right, Ara?
No, it's Era.
Era. I want to make sure I'm saying it right. Thank you, Era. I won't do that again.
I'm used to correcting. I'm used to correcting people.
I appreciate that, Era.
I'll keep you on it. So, I'm sorry.
Rachel,
Erin?
you should be let back in, right? Rachel, is she back in there?
Yes.
Yep, Rachel's back with us.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Hi, Rachel.
Great.
So I think, you know, Dayton Contemporary Dance Company, I think when it comes to their artistic and cultural vibrancy, I think as their application demonstrates, you know, they're world renowned, right? They travel all over the world, they travel all over the country. They're connected in with a lot of the other leaders in the field of contemporary dance, particularly Black contemporary dance. So to me, their artistic and cultural vibrancy is quite strong. I would like to see some better program evaluation and budget are my two hotspots when I think of applications. So I'll be mentioning them more. There was not a lot of demonstration of how they're gathering feedback from folks besides providing providing surveys. I do really appreciate that they are providing both paper and electronic, because electronic surveys really do, only certain people respond to them. Also, only certain people respond to paper surveys too. So I would just like to see a little more diversity, a little more intentionality about how they're collecting data and what data they're collecting. But in terms of the actual art that they're making and the place that they have in the community, those are really high and really strong and very evident in the application. In terms of their impact in the community, at this point, I want to say I actually really struggled with this application, besides the artistic vibrancy. I really appreciate their honesty about some of the troubles that they faced and where they are as an organization. They had to cancel a show last year due to low ticket sales. They're trying to find it's obvious they're trying to find their way kind of over the current slow spot that they find themselves in. I don't even want to say it's bad, but they're very clear about their current struggles. So I really always appreciate that. I was not as confident in the solutions that they're outlining. I have some questions about them. They seem to be based a lot in what seems to be almost retroactive instead of looking forward for the organization. So that includes reestablishing the Victoria as DCDC's base. And I understand the reason for doing so. It's an identifiable space. It's a great venue for dance. And I liked the note that, you know, even that the company is the quality of the ballet and the opera and, you know, the touring shows and everything that's kind of happening in that space. But just like I mentioned with the Dayton Art Institute, you know, there are people who don't always feel comfortable in those spaces. And so one of the things that I liked about what they had been doing is they really were going out into the community and meeting the people where they were, including at places like Levitt Pavilion. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play out. And if that is going to end up being the right move for them. I see both sides of that. But I do really appreciate when it comes to that engagement that they are looking more, they're breaking down their demographics more than just by race, or they break them down by race and affluence and zip code. And so they really are seeing that complex tapestry of residents of Dayton, more than just, you know, skin tone or whatever we might be looking at. So I did appreciate that really deep understanding of the community, and that they're tracking it and paying attention to it and can report on that is really great. One of the other things that I felt really torn about in this application is they say they're going to re-offer the holiday show in this upcoming season that they had to cancel in last season for low ticket sales, but they didn't say how they were going to make it different. So I questioned that choice. If it didn't sell once, what makes you think it's going to sell this time? And perhaps they have a plan, but they didn't include it in the application. When it comes to their financial situation, again, they were very honest and upfront about their finances and their capacity, but there are some pretty significant decreases in some of their assets. There are a couple of things they're falling short on their budget, and that, you know, it's again that the finances sort of support the general tone of the application, is that they're kind of at this significant turning point. All that being said, they are actively aware of that where they are, because then they're very honest and realistic. and they have some concrete plans, even if maybe they're not. I have some skepticism about those plans. So I think, you know, to me, this investing in an organization like this at this point is really one of the great things that local communities can do to sort of help them get back on track. That's what I got.
Thank you, Era. Anything else? I'm assuming you wrapped up your comment. Okay, great. At this time, I'm going to open it up to the other panelists, Rachel and Aaron, to provide any additional comments.
So I'd like to add a little bit on the collaboration side. You know, throughout this, they mentioned in their application their collaboration with other arts organization, and I've been able to attend those, and they do a fantastic job of collaborating with other arts organizations across the Dayton community. You know, just trying to make sure they get this form out there in different ways, different venues, as Era mentioned. You also mentioned their you know, world-renowned performances. You know, they go to New York City, and they mentioned that in the application as well. So that's definitely something, I think, as we look at organizations, that they reach outside of the lines of this community. That's always a good thing. So the only other thing I would add that, and I think, Era, this kind of goes to your comments a little bit, you know, they're in the middle of the search for a new executive director. And they mentioned that in the strategic plan portion that they recognize that, you know, their plan was pre-COVID. They've had some challenges, you know, and it doesn't make sense to have a plan firmed up until they get a new leader in place. I think that's a very smart move for them. And I also am glad to see that they recognize, and this will be my comments throughout as well. So I look at the strategic plan, and a lot of them were pre-COVID, and I'm glad to see, you know, that there's a recognition that these need to be addressed and what the organization looks like, both post-COVID, but also with new leadership. And what do we do moving forward with regards to not just financial sustainability, but artistic sustainability? And what does this look like moving forward? And they're certainly thinking about that.
I pretty much am going to just piggyback on what I've already heard, because I wanted to just start off by saying that the sense of artistic and cultural vibrancy that the Dayton Contemporary Dance Company brings is very much felt. I really love that they travel to collaborate with people and don't just always expect people to come in-house, but they go out in the community. There's been times where I knew they were coming, you know, for example, somewhere, and I knew that it was free maybe for people to attend, so I could easily encourage my own students to go and see the performances and be influenced by it, because many of them actively participate in the very things that Dayton Contemporary Dance Company is known for. So it's easy for me to, you know, tell students or people that maybe don't have a lot of resources financially to go and see this very vibrant group that offers something that most other organizations do not, and on a local level. Really enjoy the community impact. And finally, I really appreciate what Era said earlier, the honesty with understanding, like, this is what we're going through. This is, you know, we did this and we didn't expect this to happen, but it did. And this is what we plan to do about it. I would say definitely following through with those plans, because my overall ending comments was just, you know, on a level of, with the proper assistance, you know, acquired, and with proper planning, of course, moving forward, they could definitely kind of overcome some of those milestones that they've experienced as a result of the staff constantly, you know, some of the staff members constantly evolving in and out of the organization. So maybe a plan on how to retain people longer would be extremely helpful as well.
Okay, You all are breezing right through the applications at this time. Any additional commentary?
Since we have a few minutes, I'll just add, I think that a staff retention plan is really smart. Erin, I think that's actually something probably all of our applicants could be looking a little bit more at. We're all in that post-COVID great resignation, particularly in the nonprofits and the arts. We saw so many people leave the arts during the pandemic, and we all kind of rethought work. So I think that makes some really good sense. I also did like, one of the things they mentioned in their application is that they've started contracting their dancers for slightly longer periods of time. I'm not a professional dancer, but I know them. And I know one of the struggles with being involved in something like DCDC or the Dayton Ballet is that you're only on contract for part of the year. And that leaves, of course, the rest of the year, you sort of don't have a place to live or a way to pay your bills. So the movement towards that, I think, just again opens up people who maybe don't have as much financial stability and privilege are able to participate. So I was glad to see them moving in that direction, even though I know that's going to be an additional, financial, I hate to say burden, cost that they'll need to manage. So again, there are lots of things in the application that I think are really promising. But there are just a couple of things that I did have a little, that gave me some pause. For sure.
Thanks, Era. Thanks, Erin and Rachel. I'll pause for a moment to provide you all an opportunity to adjust your scoring, take any notes as needed before we move on to the next application for review. I'll just provide a few moments. Okay. Assuming I am not moving too fast, I'm going to move on next to the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance, and Erin is going to lead us in that discussion.
Yes, thank you. I sure will as soon as I get back to where I need.
Thanks, Erin.
No problem. Let me see here. I guess since we're early, that's cool.
I think Rachel is going to step out on this discussion as well.
And Rachel's in the waiting room, so we're good to go.
Great, thank you.
Almost there.
Yeah, always navigating to the right application is a little bit of a
so I'll just, again, I like to just kind of comment with what I actually wrote first. So regarding artistic and cultural vibrancy, just wanted to note that although there were many diverse relationships shown operating collaboratively within the organization, considering the numbers were a little off. It was something stated like a 50-50 split between African American and Caucasian populations within Dayton. It's a little more like 40% African American. But considering the 40% population, I would say the offerings geared towards this audience is still somewhat slim. Not to say that it should be geared completely towards them, but the offerings, I should say, are somewhat slim. It appears that, though, in the coming year, there are plans for Black Music Month, which I think is really cool because it's something in addition to Black History Month, but maybe having still something for Black History Month would serve, again, that large population, and maybe touching on, like, really seeking programs that deal with specific things relating to the African-American community, or even the African-American Dayton community, because, you know, different regions have different, you know, issues and things going on. So maybe something geared towards the Black Dayton community for Black History Month. I didn't really see any evidence of anything for Black History Month, but I do really enjoy the idea of Black Music Month and the programs that are coming up for that. Really enjoying seeing those plans and actually planning on going to see those because it sounds exciting. Community impact and engagement. Enjoying the community efforts, especially with reference to schools like E.J. Brown and similar institutions. Again, as mentioned earlier, because of relations with schools like this, if you're wanting to gain and retain an audience, it'd be a major attribute at Black History Month and other events centered around celebrating other Black and Brown cultures, but still enjoying the community effort there. Let's see, and then regarding organizational capacity, I wrote that the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance seems to have a very, very stable financial plan and projected goals for the future. I didn't really see anything that jumped out as being alarming in that area. It's a really well organized and easy to follow and read through application. And so I think because of maybe the planning of the organization in and of itself, that was a helpful attribute. Overall, I think it's a robust organization focused on making the arts available and accessible to all. And that is a major accomplishment. I believe that with the inclusion of aforementioned things like Black History Month, and with the empathy towards other human issues beyond the local community, like the Ukraine, I think the fact that they're focusing on issues within and outside of the community, things that maybe we can't touch and see, but we can feel through our news programs and things like that. Seeing the outreach to other communities like in the Ukraine, I think because of that, the DPAA will continue to grow and achieve their goals gradually, more and more over time.
Okay, thanks, Erin. So I have sort of two main points I want to make sure I hit before I kind of get into some other areas. One is, you know, they talk a lot about diversifying people who are they're putting on stage, and particularly within the opera, which I definitely appreciate. When I went and saw the opera, however, one of the things that I noted is that their designers are not well versed in costuming and lighting people with different skin tones. So as they work to put more diversity on stage, I encourage them to also put more diversity into their design pool, whether it's hiring designers of color or whether it's just making sure they have the capacity to properly support those performers on stage, because it is different and it needs to definitely be included and addressed. You know, they talk about the possible purchases of an LED wall. So this is my theater designer hat coming on here. I found the projections. I understood the choice to use projections. I first saw Dusty and Gold because it's hard to do without them, but I also felt the quality of the projections was fairly behind the times. I would have liked to have seen something with some better technology support. I know that can get expensive. but I was kind of distracted at times by the lower quality projection. So those are sort of some of my hesitancies when it comes to kind of the artistic and cultural vibrancy. But I also really appreciate the fact that a community like Dayton is able to support organizations of this type, and that we have access to opera and the Philharmonic, the ballet. In a lot of communities our size, our makeup, don't necessarily have access to those things. So I really value that. And I really value them going out into the community and exposing particularly children who maybe don't feel that the ballet or the opera or the Philharmonic are places that they're welcome, and exposing them to those art forms earlier on. I think that's a really important part of what they're doing. So I do really value that for sure. In terms of community engagement, again, I would have liked to see some more robust surveying and participation in some of the feedback they're collecting. They're only doing online surveys. I'll just mention again, online surveys are only responded to by certain people, mostly white people. So you just want to make sure you're finding other ways to collect that data. I know they have a wonderful program with the Dayton Metro Library where people can check out tickets, and that was not really included in the application, which then makes me wonder about maybe some other of those programs that just didn't make it into the application for whatever reason. But as a reviewer, I would have liked to have seen more of that, just again to help support that vibrancy and that equity piece. I actually have some concerns about their financial and strategic positions. It's from the application, it made it sound that the strategic plan was almost entirely written by one person, the new CEO, without input from the community and other people. So Erin, if you read something different, please let me know. Sometimes I misread. And that is a huge red flag for me, because it's not based on what the community wants, the artists want, or the audiences want, but one person. I was also really concerned about the statement that they're going to do nothing new and will undertake no expansion of activity without funding being committed first. And how, as an organization, are you going to evolve? I mean, there's a balance between, you don't want to commit yourself to spending millions of dollars that you don't have already raised, but to not even start the process of taking some risks and expanding into some newer markets or newer works without complete financial backing is, I think, really going to throttle the organization in a way that I'm definitely concerned about. So those hesitancies I had. I was also very concerned to see that their cash and cash equivalents on their balance sheet at the end of 2021 were only $28,000 for an organization with a staff of that size. That's also another huge red flag to me, because they don't have the money to pay their bills. And granted, it's one day and things can shift, but it was still alarming. And then, and I'm also, they talk about how their audiences are aging. We've all been talking about this in the arts for like 30 years, and those audiences keep sticking around. We love them. But they didn't really talk about how they're planning on doing that directly. So I was left with questions around that, particularly since it's not a new problem. And then overall, I found the application to really just toss out some broad, unsupported generalizations. Even wrote some of them down. The very effort to inspire people of all ages and backgrounds to fall in love with the performing arts makes an impact, but it didn't specify what impact or provide any support. And I'm not sure I agree with that statement. And because we encompass 3 professional companies and 2 pre-professional companies, we are already innovative. Again, like that, a statement like that just needs some support and specifics. You always need to make sure in a grant application that you're really answering the questions and you're providing data and support so that your reviewers can score your application as high as possible. And that just wasn't as evident in this application as it is in some of the other applications that we reviewed. So those are some of my comments.
I don't disagree. Everyone's input is interesting for this very reason, providing multiple diverse perspectives. And so, yeah. I guess I understand the hesitancy to plan before money is there. As a single mother of 3, I get that. But for a organization that's been around for a while, that might be dancing on dangerous territory. So I completely understand your plight with that specifically. At least making a plan for it.
Right. And I'm not, again, I'm not like just, if I saw an application where people like, we're going to go to the moon next year, I'd be like, are you? But I think I've just, in my professional experience, I've just seen so many organizations that they kind of get into that scarcity mindset. And then they're not able to innovate and grow and really do start to kind of wither. So
yeah,
just to flag, there's obviously lots of ways it could play out for the organization, but.
Aaron, anything further? I don't think so.
I don't have anything further to add.
Okay, we'll just take a pause for a moment, provide you all an opportunity to adjust your scores, take any notes from our discussion. And I just want to thank you all. These have been really, really rich discussions. So for our audience, I appreciate, the depth that you all have put into the evaluation of these applications. I'll pause for a moment to provide you all an opportunity. As needed.
Oh, sorry, one last thing, my bad, since we're just kind of pausing. I was curious to know, and I know they can't answer specifically, but when feedback is being requested from the community, I just want to know, and I'm curious to know how much of that feedback is being taken from places like E.J. Brown, from the actual children, from the students, and not just from the audiences that go to the performances and actually see and view the performances, but how much feedback is actually being taken from the students and, and on what level. And, when it comes to surveying, are you always also leaving room for them to write in additional comments that maybe not present in the survey? So if that's not present, maybe that would definitely be something to make present, is if you're going to involve them, also listen to them and hear their feedback and take it in as well. That's the only other thing. I promise I got it.
Thanks, Aaron. You're within the window, so that worked. Give it about a minute, and then we're going to move on to our next application. Okay, Karen, would you let Rachel back in, I believe? If she's not, or is she already in?
Rachel just joined us again.
Okay, great. Okay, then we're going to move next to the Human Race Theater Company, and we're going to ask Rachel to lead that discussion.
Great, thanks, Stacy.
Thank you, Rachel.
So the Human Race Theater, I had the fortune of being able to go see Barbecue through this process. So that was a really great experience in helping to frame this conversation. So Human Race produces a lot of shows, that one included, that explores really relevant themes. For example, that one brought to life the very complicated family dynamics that a lot of us deal with. It had race included. It talked about addiction. It was funny, so very entertaining. So really enjoyed that. And that was reflected in their application as well. You could see the variety of different titles of the plays that they bring through their season, and they don't shy away from divisive things. Again, you could see that throughout some of the content of the application. When you looked at the staff, so there are new artistic director that they brought in, very highly qualified staff. They're very lean organization. So they've got the executive director and the artistic director, and then, rely on a variety of different folks to put these shows together, but very well qualified, very well positioned to help the org maintain sustainable success, with sustainable being a really key word in there. So in the application, as I kind of mentioned in an earlier organization, they do talk about a new strategic plan being in the works. So that was good to see. Again, you think about like the pre-COVID, the old plan was 2019-ish. And so having both the new artistic director and having a post-COVID organization, I think it'll be a good exercise to go through. But they mentioned in the application some of the goals for the executive director, and those were really on balance for the organization as well. So when you looked at their finances, it was very balanced in terms of both earned revenue and gifted revenue. They've got strong individual gifts, which is good. So that's something that always comes to my attention is, are you earning enough that's in balance with what you're asking the community to support you with? There is a caution in those finances with regards to the expenses increasing. And also with that, a negative change in net assets, although it is worth mentioning that there's still strong net assets there. So, but, just making sure that as the organization moves forward and in terms of considering it, that they keep that in mind and maintain that balance. I would say an area that probably needs work is more in the collaboration space. There was a mention of the food bank and a little bit about being open to those collaborations, but not as specific as we've seen in some of the other applications. And so my recommendation would be, as this organization thinks about its strategic plan and how it can really collaborate with other organizations and making sure that when that collaboration occurs, it's very mission oriented. So whether it has to do with the season of plays they're producing in that year or about the art form itself, there was some note in there about job shadowing with Daybreak, which is a fantastic type of collaboration in terms of supporting the kids that go through Daybreak and also alignment with their art form. But I think that there's a little bit of work that needs to be had in terms of thinking about that, and also thinking about how can it also move more outside of its theater doors in that collaboration space. Specifically for community impact, as I thought about that goes right back to a lot of the themes that they bring to life. And also along with their artistic vibrancy. So those were the big key areas, and I'll stop there for my fellow panelists to add their comments.
Thanks, Rachel. Erin?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in, Erin, if I can. So I think, like a lot of our organizations, one of the things we see really clearly in HRTC's application is a rebuilding post-pandemic. They also had some staff shifts, as we alluded to. They have a new executive director. Their artistic director is also fairly new in the scope of things, and that also was a restructuring for them. So a lot of the application sort of refers to, we will be adding this again next season. For example, they talk about adding some additional surveys and evaluation tutorials in this coming season, but they don't necessarily elaborate on what they're planning on doing. So a little more detail there, if they would have had it, I think would have supported the application overall. I just want to comment on Rachel's comment about going out into the community. They have engaged a new engagement coordinator, which is mentioned in the application. But again, I think some more information about what that person is doing could have been really beneficial to supporting, you know, our being able to provide some, review those criteria for the organization as a whole. You know, again, they have it's clear they want to make some changes, and we're already seeing some of those changes that are coming through, but they're not always as fleshed out as they could be, again, with the acknowledgement that I believe their new executive director started earlier this year, so I'm sure they haven't gotten very far yet. I'm curious to see how they continue to grow and change. The regional theater movement that HRTC was originally part of in the 80s is a completely different beast at this point than it was, so there does need to be, you know, some shifts that are happening. And I do like that they're really working towards some equitable assets. They don't necessarily refer directly to we see you white American theaters demands in the application under that name, but some of the steps they outline, changing rehearsal times and practice and schedules and all that are a response to that larger national movement that we've been seeing. So I was glad to see that is included. The bringing in of Soldiers Play to Dayton, that's not something this community typically has access to. I don't know the last time a straight play made a stop in Dayton, actually. So instead of a musical. So I think I'm really hopeful that is also indicative of some of the directions that the organization is going. Again, it's very evident they're kind of in this turning point and this thinking ahead and looking ahead. And I'm curious to see how that all plays out. I would have liked more information if they had it about some of the specifics that they want to tackle. But I do also acknowledge that sometimes you don't have that information quite yet when you're working on a grant application with a deadline.
Thanks, Kara. Aaron?
Okay. Yeah, so overall, I think the variety of performances and productions is pretty exciting. I also wanted to note the Soldiers Play being brought there, got to see that, and I think having productions like that is very helpful for many different ways in the community. It's a very layered, you know, play. And I think it offers something that, you know, many people of this generation don't get a chance to know about, learn about, experience. On another level, the innovative approach to offering childcare services while parents enjoy production. I think, to me, that speaks to having proper surveying processes of the audience. That sounds like something that was a result of people maybe saying, well, I'd get out more often if I had somebody to watch my kids. I know for me that when my kids were especially younger, that was definitely my plight. And I probably would have gotten out more had there been more offerings like that. So I was really excited to see that. And that lets me know that they're definitely trying to improve community engagement as well. I think they definitely, I really enjoyed the idea of bringing plays like Barbecue to the public eye, because it is shocking. And just as the mission and the vision of the organization promises kind of startling you into a conscious reality, I think plays like that definitely speak to their vision and their mission. Sorry. One suggestion for improvement would be to reach out to more diverse institutions for collaboration. I know, for example, Central State University has a theater department. They put on productions every year, usually at least twice a year. So institutions like that would definitely help not just improve diversity, but maybe improve practices of having places for students to go once they complete their matriculation through their academic career and are ready to go now on a different level. Now they have a place that they can belong to outside of their educational institutions. They can build more networking that way, just like how some other organizations we're reviewing go out more into the community. I think that would be an improvement. Let's see. Then it just kind of reset on me there. Let me make sure I don't want to make sure I'm missing anything. While there is evidence of proficiency and efficiency for the artistic and executive directors, there's very little sufficient evidence shown through the staff. I understand that the application said key personnel, but there was only information on one person. And I know that there's definitely more than one person handling business there. So having some more information so we can see just how diverse and how proficient the staff is, that would be especially helpful rather than just providing one person's information. Overall, though, the Human Race Theater, I believe, is making a strong effort to serve the community on a grand scale. And so that's really all I have to say for now. I'll digress for the moment.
Hey, I think everyone has had an opportunity to comment on the Human Race Theater Company, and I really appreciate your comments and thoughtfulness. I'll pause to see if there's any additional comments. If not, then I will allow each of you just an opportunity to take some notes and review your scoring as needed. Okay. At this time, we're going to move into a break, and we will reconvene at 11 a.m. So we actually have about 19 minutes, and we will start back up promptly at 11 a.m. Karen, have I missed anything from your end?
Not at all. So attendees, you're welcome to hang on with us. I'm going to put up we're taking a break slide for anybody who joins during the break, and we will see you back here at 11 o'clock.
Thank you, Karen.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks, Stacy. Go ahead.
Thank you, Karen. So I was going to say welcome back, everyone, as well. So welcome back. And if there is anyone new joining us, we'd like to thank you for participating in today's session. We will proceed with the next portion of the review of our applications. And we will start first with K12 Gallery and TEJAS, if I'm saying that correctly. And we will start with Rachel being the lead panelist on that. Did I say that right, Karen? TEJAS?
I think it's
TEJAS.
Yeah.
TEJAS.
Totally wrong. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Rachel, if you will lead us in that.
Sure. Thanks, Stacy. So I'm going to be upfront and start this conversation by saying this is kind of a tale of two cities. The application itself, just overall, I would say there's a lot more that could have been done to this to beef it up and provide a lot more context to the work that K12 is doing, the programming evaluations, those types of things. But when you go into K12 and you participate in their programs, which I've done, I brought my daughter to one of the Saturday art classes. You can see a lot of that at work. So I just upfront want to say that, there's I would encourage a lot more content for K-12 in future applications. So that said, they have a lot of variety in their programs, which is excellent. Not only in the variety of mediums, so glass, painting, charcoal, like sculpting, all of that. In addition, they've got after school programs, they've got artists and training programs. So a lot of variety also between student programs, adult programs, workshop events. There's just a lot to offer the community from this organization. And with that, there's also quite a bit of collaboration with this organization and the local school districts. They have a partnership with the Greene County Juvenile Court, bringing those kids in for their programming, Shawnee Nation. So there are some collaborations that were consistent over a lot of the organizations, like Art in the City was mentioned in a couple of things that have to do with downtown, and K-12 is downtown. It's a very iconic building with all of its murals, so you can't miss it downtown. So it makes sense that that is a very important collaboration, but they also have very unique ones like that juvenile court program, like the Shawnee Nation and things like that. So with regards to staffing, their executive director is highly qualified, their artistic director also. I would encourage this organization to think about strategic staffing as it continues to build itself. Finding people that have business backgrounds, for example, might benefit it. And just kind of looking at some of this, it's very interesting to see the dynamic in how it staffed itself. It stood out to me. I would also say the finances also, unfortunately, stuck out as well. There was a huge increase in ad expenses, and that is possibly because in post-COVID, a lot of the organizations are showing increased expenditures, like in marketing and things like that, as it tries to build back from that. However, there was also a very, very big shortfall projected for the end of this year. And there was a lot of reliance on CARES Act and PPP funding. So it just gives me a huge pause there. So that was something that stood out. And then the last thing I would add to this conversation would be that while their evaluation focuses a lot on, the typical participation in programming, satisfaction, and things like that, I would, considering the type of programs it has and the student programs, and I would expect to see a little bit more evaluation in terms of like social emotional evaluation. There's a lot of great templates out there. They're not expensive. Some of them are free. So just thinking about, how do you not only measure your business programs, like the ones that I would bring my daughter to and say, yes, this is a great program, and also provide some demographic data from that. But thinking about too, for those other programs that have more of an educational base, how do you measure the success of those programs and the impact of those programs on those students? Oh, and one more thing I forgot. The strategic plan, and again, consistent theme, right? This is a time that everyone's due for a refresh post-COVID, new staff, things like that, although K-12 doesn't necessarily have the new staff element, but it is being done by the executive director. And I would encourage them to think about bringing in a third party to do their strategic plan. And really, as you think about the finances, the evaluation, things like that, that might really help a lot in terms of thinking about, sustainability from a business perspective. But I do not want to detract from the fact that the value, the variety of programming, the collaboration, the quality of that, and the connection it has to the city is fantastic. So I will leave it at that and open it up to my fellow panelists to see. I'm sure you have some other input as well.
Yeah. So I want to just start by saying that I couldn't help but to agree more, because I noticed some things that were left off that are major factors in influences in the overall vitality of TEJAS. I was surprised to see certain things left off that I'm aware of, but what if I wasn't aware of certain things, like the #1 fundraiser for TEJAS is Art Off. And Art Off, the live painting competition, is their ultimate fundraising revenue. And I had to go back and look to see if maybe I skipped over it or missed it. I didn't see any evidence of the #1 fundraiser, and I'm concerned as to why that was left off. But from witnessing it as impactful and as it is, I think that's something that deserves to be included, not just because it serves the community, but because there should be additional feedback. Going to the feedback, the surveys, the survey was ultra slim, and it left absolutely no room for anyone to write in additional comments, additional feedback, and that leaves absolutely no room for developmental change for the organization itself. There's, no matter how well coordinated a survey is, or anything for that nature, there's always going to be room for improvement. And so I'm concerned deeply that that survey template, considering the broad numbers and kinds of people that TEJAS serves and all the different socioeconomic backgrounds, I was surprised to see a survey that did not reflect that at all. That was very deeply concerning. And so I would say that, yeah, that's definitely room for improvement. I would say that the lack of proficiency and efficiency of the survey is even felt through really successful, or I wouldn't say successful, but really impactful events like Art Off, which I would say probably could, use some feedback. Anything can use some feedback, because some things are remaining consistent or the same and not changing. And some more efficient surveying tactics could really be helpful for that reason. In surveying, of course, everyone, not just the adults, but obviously the children that come through there in a way. So, we're definitely getting the impact of the future needs being met. But beyond that, TEJAS is a very colorful organization. And I mean colorful like on so many levels, visually, across the board, the different kinds of people that you can just meet, engaging with the different programs and different events that TEJAS has. They're very visible as soon as you come off the highway. So that's definitely very helpful. And that's really, I agree regarding the strategic plan, and also just regarding the survey template and everything. I think the grassroots of the organization is lovely. But while it's nice to maintain, the vision of people initially involved, in order for that vision to really be extremely beneficial for all and not just the visionary themselves, there definitely needs to be some more outside input.
I was gonna say, I don't have anything to say because everybody said it, but then those of you who know me know that's not true, because I always have things to say. But I do agree, like the CEO doing the strategic plan single-handedly problematic. No assessment of student learning. If you're going to be an educational facility, you need to be doing some post and pre-assessments, some sort of assessment as just, even if it's just confidence levels, no real feedback on what your students are learning. That was all absent from this application. Audiences were not targeted, at least not in the application itself, right? It's sort of talked about, here are all of these places we go, here are all of these things that we do. And without that intentionality of who you're trying to reach, well, one, you can't measure if you're successful because you don't have a clear objective. But two, everything can become very watered down, and you get that mission creep and you start losing money because you're doing things that aren't true to your mission. And So, that lack of audience intentionality really stood out for me. And yeah, I mean, I think the financials are concerning. There's some numbers in there that were already highlighted that I won't reiterate because listening to numbers is boring. But oh, it just logged me out. Gosh darn it. Okay, but I think I can remember my comments while I log back in. I think, I would, it is a struggle to put together an application for an organization like TEJAS that really is doing a lot of things for a lot of people. And I think all of us acknowledge that as panelists, that there's a lot of very good stuff happening. But what the application lacked was using exemplars to support that. So even though you can't talk about every program that you're doing, every criteria, every section of the application should have had an exemplar pulled out and then included in the application with a little more detail. And then as reviewers, we are able to sort of extrapolate that into the larger picture. But there was just such a lack of specificity and detail in the application that it is really hard to evaluate based solely on the application what the organization is doing. So I just echo that sentiment that we've heard from my other two fellow brilliant panelists.
To her point, so let me add in one last comment, and it goes right back to that the application needs to be beefed up and that things might be present that just weren't present in the application. When it talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, it talked a lot about the programmatic elements that lend itself to that. So the different cultures and things like that in terms of what types of art forms it brings to people. I would like to see the organization think about that on a deeper level. So not just in the services, the programs, the art forms you provide, but also who's on staff. I know we had some veterans on staff, which was good to see, but thinking about too, whether it's board members, instructors, things like that, like thinking about it a little bit deeper, I think would benefit the organization tremendously as it thinks about that topic in particular.
And that actually, thank you, Rachel, that reminded me of one of my comments that I had is I appreciated that they were talking about including different cultures and histories in their projects that they're doing, Black History Month, Dios de Merca. But it was not clear to me who was teaching those and leading those. And I just always start to get concerned about appropriation and not making sure that you're using authentic voices and life experiences to support that programming. So that was another I think thing that sort of rose to the surface for me in terms of, again, just that lack of I mean, maybe the people teaching that do have that life experience, but it wasn't presented in the application.
Thank you, Era, Rachel, and Aaron. This concludes the review of this application at this time. I'll give you just a brief moment to make any comments, your notes, make any adjustments to your scoring as needed. And then we're going to quickly move into Muse Machine, and we will, Era will lead us in that discussion. Okay. Era, Muse Machine.
I'm ready.
Great.
So is this our fourth or fifth application where there's been a shift in leadership within the, either upcoming or the past couple of years? I'm exhausted just thinking about all these leadership changes. That said, of course, Muse, it has a really strong history with its programming and its leadership. It's definitely a staple in the community, supporting a large number of children, either in schools, other locations, or coming to their events. Their musical production that they do every year is highly competitive, and basically anybody else doing youth theater in the area knows not to do a show at that time because you won't have any children because they'll all be at Muse. So I think that in itself is a testament, even though that's not really in the application. But So I think I'm excited to see where their new executive is going to take the organization. I'm excited to see what sort of things they hang on to from the pandemic and some of the shifts that they make. One of the things I appreciated about the application is they sort of really did a nice job of highlighting some of the less visible parts of their programming. I think we all know that they do a musical downtown every year because there's billboards, but their Educate the Educator series, which is not what they call it, but their teacher professional development series is really quite remarkable, and a huge tenet of what they do, but just not quite as visible. So I was really grateful that there were a lot of details around those pieces included in the application, everything from some really substantial planning to execution to how they gather feedback. I think there's a lot of good stuff happening. So some other more kind of specifics. Again, they are doing a lot of evaluation. I'm not sure it's very helpful evaluation. The tools they provided were pretty blanket, things that we tend to see in arts organizations, not specific to the programming that they're offering. And again, I didn't see any sign of actually measuring student learning through assessment. It's more about evaluations of teaching staff. And I know that is part of what their goal is to develop those teaching artists, but I would really like to see some evidence of what the students are getting out of these experiences as well. I think their footprint is really impressive. They cover, I don't know how many counties, but it's a lot. And they're really out there in the community and visiting a lot of schools. I wonder, and a question I had that I would have appreciated an answer to is, how do you maintain the quality of your programming when you're stretching yourself that far? What places are, what checks and balances do you have in place? Are you doing observations of your teaching artists, for example, at various schools across the area in different demographics? Just sort of, I think that would have really it's a very solid application, and that would have really taken it into that upper part for me if there would have been a little bit of attention to that. One of the other things I really appreciated about the application and the organization is they do have a really large endowment, provides a substantial part of their funding. And it's really easy for an organization to be like, oh, well, we have a huge endowment. We can just hang back and collect our interest and it'll be great. But that's not their approach. They're still continuing to add to their endowments and some other funds. I think they had 2 or 3 new funds that were added in the last year on their financial statements. They're continuing to fundraise and think about new ways of fundraising. And new ways of engagement. And so I think that speaks to their longevity and their sustainability, and that they'll be successful moving forward. And I think those are sort of all my comments at the moment.
I guess I'll go next if that's cool. I was definitely impressed with the outreach. But even more so, I think as an educator, what rang really loudly for me in a good way was what Era already mentioned, the desire to continue to build up the educators and instructors involved. What we call at my institution, the faculty development, is really strongly felt. The fact that they are not just, bringing education to them, but sending them out to get educated outside of, of the state and everything. I think that is just extremely impressive and appreciated, especially again with an educator like myself. I really love seeing instances where the educators are not forgotten about, because they're trying to build up the future. I love how, I think the part of the impact with Muse Machine and the success of it is that they're bringing in extremely proficient people to make the already proficient people even more proficient. You cannot go wrong with that. That is exactly where it starts. And that, that really spoke really loud and clear to me. The involvement with such institutions like the East End Community Center, the Dayton Contemporary Dance Company, and other diverse groups demonstrate their desire to impact the community for a lifetime on many levels. That is something I really enjoyed seeing and very much appreciate as well. And just the very well organized application speaks to just the impact of the organization itself. And so it seems that they're definitely, while we're also giving feedback, it doesn't seem like they will shy away from whatever feedback is given. It seems that they are truly interested in making sure that this remain a very, not just relevant, but vibrant, rich, all-encompassing type of organization. Very well established, nationally endowed, very proper strategic planning, goal setting, and nice community relations.
Ditto to everybody else. It's a very well done application, very thorough, and very mature. It's very emblematic of a mature organization, and that was I think all of us noticed that. So and even in the finances, they're high marks there in terms of the endowment, in terms of how it's managing its income, its risk, things like that. So I got to attend one of the student performances where they did fractions. And even brought my kids with me because I thought they would be good evaluators as well, and just seeing the performance and how it went. And so it was really great to see the integration between educational concepts and art forms, and how they're able to take those kids, to both in the production of that performance and then being on stage. And so you think about, the learning that's in that in terms of being in front of everybody. And so it was a really great way to experience the organization. I would like to see, going through their staff backgrounds, lots of performing arts, lots of quality. I mean, it's when you see the performances every year, it's obvious that there is a lot of high quality people in this organization. I would like to see or think about more a staple educational person. Lots of the staff members have educational elements to them, but their background, their base, their foundation is in that performing arts. So, and I think maybe that goes to the evaluation a little bit. It's a very thorough evaluation. Not so much though, if you think about some of the ways that they impact those students, they could, again, go back to the social emotional. There's lots of different ways that you could integrate some of those types of evaluations, pre, post, things like that, and into what they're already doing, maybe shorten it up a little bit too, just to get a little bit higher percentage on return. And that's a little bit more of an assumption just based on the length of that. Looking forward to their next strategic plan. They're due for it, but looking at the quality of the current one, no doubt they'll end up with a very high quality strategic plan the next go around. And I think that's all I got.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Era. Thank you, Aaron, for your thoughtful review of that application. I'll just pause for a moment to provide you all an opportunity to take any notes, as well as to readjust your scoring as needed before we move on to the next application. So I'll just give a few moments. Okay, we are going to move along next to the Springfield Symphony Orchestra, and Era will be leading us in that discussion.
I do think it's important to point out this is our one outside of Dayton physically located organization, and you know, and that does shift things a little bit. They're dealing with a different population. There are plenty of people in Springfield who think Dayton is too far to go, and vice versa. So I think I just want to put that out there. That being said, one of the things I really appreciate about SSO is their ability to stick to their mission while also providing diverse programming for a wide range of audiences. I don't know that they're definitely in the top tier of organizations that I've seen that have been able to manage that. And Springfield is a very diverse, divided community in terms of race and wealth, socioeconomic status would be the longer way of saying that. So their ability to try to navigate that, I think, is just impressive and comes through in the application and in their programming as well. I think every time I see a list of their season, I'm like, oh, I'm really excited about that one. Probably not going to go to that one because that one's not for me, but I'm glad that it's there because it's there for other people who too want to go see that. For example, video games. I hear enough video games in my house, so not for me, but I'm sure there are lots of people who are going to be very excited about that multimedia presentation they have coming up. Some more kind of specific comments about the various pieces. Again, like their cultural vibrancy, their artistic, very high. They've been bringing in some very world-renowned folks. They have a lot of people involved in the orchestra and other programming. So very strong there. In terms of their community impact, that kind of, I think, latches on to what I was saying about their programming and their diversity and what they're offering, where they're going. They're participating in the Veterans Park in the summer. They're in schools. They have a variety of other programs that are happening. I really appreciate their recent connection to churches and using that as a way to reach out to primarily Black audience members and other artists, since there's already a connection there. They recently started the Springfield Jazz, I think it's a jazz festival, and that seems to be going well, and I'm excited to see how that continues to grow. I think Springfield actually has a really significant history with Black music, and so I think it's great to see additional sort of being recaptured and folded into this larger organization. I thought there were some really smart things happening in their financials and organizational strategy. There were some things that I went, maybe there's more information that I'm missing. They took advantage of pandemic funding, used that to pay down some debts and sort of just put themselves in an overall better position. So I think that's great. But they do have a significant shortfall in their budgeted earned income, which is primarily ticket sales. That being said, I think we're seeing that across the board. I think it's one of those things that organizations are really struggling to get right post-COVID. Are people coming back? When are they coming back? How are they coming back? We don't really know. But still, anytime you see, I think it might be a $60,000 deficit, it does give you some pause. They're not a huge financial organization, and just how they're going to accommodate that. The other thing that sort of caught my eye is that they mentioned in the narrative, they mentioned 2 endowment funds, but those are not reflected anywhere in their financial statements. And so my guess is the Springfield Foundation technically owns those, but it was still interesting to include them in the narrative and then not provide any support for them in any of the other documentation. So I'm not quite sure what happened there, but a little more clarity around that. It's hard for me to consider those when I'm looking at the financial health when I don't have any documentation to support them. I also thought another sort of miss in the application that could have helped. There's a question that asks specifically about staffing. I'm trying to find it. And in development and diversity within your staffing. And they chose to focus entirely on their board and didn't include a lot of information about staff and how they find staff and hire staff. And one of the things that I know, because they said it at the performance I was at, is they've just hired a new education director. So that seemed like an easy thing to include in somewhere in the application. They do talk about staff other places in the application when they talk about qualifications, but not really that strategic part of how they're hiring and how they're retaining staff. So that said, a lot of their staff has been there a very long time. A lot of the people, they gave awards for people who have been playing with the orchestra for decades. So there's obviously something happening because people are staying, but it's just not really illuminated clearly in the application itself. I think that's, those are my comments about the application at this point. So I will pass it off to my fellow reviewers.
Okay. You kind of took many of the words out of my mouth, honestly, because I did really appreciate and actually I'm excited about going out to more performances now after having read this application. Jazz, love it, love the history of it, love everything about it on many levels, and to see an orchestra formed around it, and to see what Era mentioned about the intentional collaboration among African-American churches, because the history of African-American churches is a lot different. It's not just all about religion. It's about social connections, interactions, civil rights, and it's been known to be a safe kind of haven. And so to see them reach out specifically to African-American churches and collaborating with them is really impressive. I'm really enjoying seeing definitely seeing people being brought in to work with the Springfield Symphony Orchestra, but I'm also really enjoying seeing the history of lesser known musicians, specifically from Springfield, being learned about through these programs. I dinged them most, I would say, I hate to use that word, but what concerned me the most is what I should say was the evidence of diversity in staff. So what I wrote specifically was, while the SSO demonstrates impressive and astounding efforts to maintain and even surpass financial goals, they've not shown evidence of a diverse board. And so basically I wrote it's safe to assume, I guess, that there is diversity within the board because of their rich community and collaborative efforts, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it actually is diverse. It could just be non-diverse board and staff showing an interest in diversity, but it doesn't necessarily prove that it exists. So that would be something that I would produce more of. Otherwise, I would say showing, amazing, influential, well-established goal setting and, achievements that clearly enrich and bring to the public eye the richness of the music coming out of Springfield. Oh, love the community orchestra. The youth one is what I meant to say. The idea of that, really a great idea. I digress.
So I would agree with Erin. Erin took a lot of really good comments. So what I will add, I really like the organization's willingness to modernize, to really think about how do they, as Era mentioned, stay true to their mission, but also do things that will attract new audiences? So, for example, they mentioned Video Game Live, and you think about who's going to attend that, who may not otherwise set foot through those doors in order to listen to them. And also Bella Fleck and that collaboration. So Bella Fleck was at the Rose last season, and now it's very, high quality. I think it's bluegrass, and that's coming to Springfield. So that it's really great to see that type of collaboration happening there. And I really, I think my other panelists spoke volumes of the different types of collaboration and things that it does there in the Springfield community. I would say the audience survey is a little light. There's a lot of mention throughout the application of community feedback and public, and there's students that participate, but it's not really reflected in the survey that they provided. And maybe this is collected in a different way, just didn't see it. But would highly encourage some meaningful community input. So not just the people who go there to watch their performances, but how do you understand what the needs of the community are? How are you gathering that feedback in order to adjust as an organization? And then, oh man, I can't even read my own writing. There we go. Aaron mentioned this, and I'll just kind of piggyback on it. When asked about their diversity, equity, inclusion, they mentioned all their commitments to it, but didn't necessarily see how that was truly integrated into them as an organization. And maybe my guess is that they're probably early in this process. This looks like they've thought about it, they know what they need to do, but they need to go into that execution phase. And so I would just call that out. And then the last thing is, they have a strategic plan. It's a nice strategic plan. There's no timing associated with it. They say in the narrative that they review it on an annual basis. They incorporate patron feedback, which I already mentioned earlier. So my question is, when was it written and when are you due for a refresh? And like I've mentioned multiple times already, we've seen a lot of these organizations are at this point right now where they're refreshing their strategic plans because of their post-COVID world, or because they've got new staff, or really just thinking about how do they bring in new audiences. And so I would encourage this organization to really articulate, when does that strategic plan get refreshed? Who is it done by? That's also not known here. Is it done by a third party, or do they do it in-house? Is it a board member, whoever that is? Because that'll help keep them thinking about sustainability, that the DEI elements and things like that, and how that's really playing out. That's it.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Aaron and Era. So I'll just pause for a moment, provide you all an opportunity to take any notes if you have not already collected those notes. Adjust any scores as needed, and then we will open with the review of WDPR Discover Classical with Aaron.
Did you want me to go ahead and begin at this very moment?
Yeah, I think that'll work.
Okay.
Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So, Discover Classical, looking at the overall artistic, cultural vibrancy. Again, I like to just kind of read my comments first and then elaborate. Discover Classical offers a variety of eloquent music and art, as well as a diverse staff and board. They have made provisions in making classical music accessible to all. I think that's their greatest impact, is that the classical music is definitely being more reachable, accessible to all. Definitely, they seem to really take a lot of pride in the fact that they have been digitizing their music so that it remains also relevant to the technology of today. I am concerned, of course, about a couple of things. I would say maybe the lack of intentional recognition of non-white musical artists. I see that there are some provisions that were very recently made over the past 37 years, some very recent revisions made to include more of an African-American standpoint. And so maybe that impact has not been fully felt yet to the point where they felt the need to kind of record that impact much. I'm still feeling the lack of that through evidence of the application, as well as just listening to the station as well. I would say that it probably would greatly increase the interest from a younger and more diverse audience. Maybe be recommended that there be some more influence added to not just make it just accessible, but relevant, maybe including more programs during the month of February and even year round that make the classical station, while remaining devoted to classical music and making it accessible, understanding that classical music has had influences from all kinds of people. So it would be really a great investment to see more of that happen. I'm curious to know if maybe the lack of adding that, the great lack of adding that could be for fear of maybe losing funding from the longstanding audiences. It's noted here that over 60% of the funding comes from the listeners, which I understand that you want to make sure you appease the audience that you're serving, but also understanding that even though you want to maintain that longstanding and reliable funding, there still is the need to grow into the future and into creating more events, roles, programs, things that could really expand the listening audience. It doesn't really seem like anything is really being done outside of digitizing the collection to expand the actual listening audience. And so that would be my overall mostly feedback from them. I would say that their financial health is impressive. Remaining debt-free since 1999 is quite impressive on any level. And obviously maintenance of this requires persistence of planning, financial goal setting, successful fundraising, and of course, meeting the needs of the target audience in order to maintain said donations. But again, we don't want to get into trying to maintain donations as being driving force as well. There should definitely be more expansion out into the community. So, it looks like right now they're housed in Springfield. I'd like to see, I guess, more evidence of how they're moving out into the community, and digitizing things is great because people can click a button and listen, but some people don't have access to that kind of technology. So how else are you meeting the needs of the community? Let's see. I think I already said this, it would benefit the organization to put more effort into collaborating with more local diverse organizations as they do with the youth. So yeah, they're definitely collaborating more with the youth, but also diversity among races and socioeconomic backgrounds, of course. I think that is all I have for now.
I'll jump in here. Piggyback on that. It's so Erin and I got to do a tour of the station. So that was really helpful because there are some things that came out in that conversation that I think if it would have come out more in the application would have been extremely beneficial, because as we think about this organization, we think about it as a radio station. So, and it's funded, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which has a requirement in terms of individual donations that go with it. So it makes sense, as you think about the listener drives and things like that, that would be how their finances are structured. Although there is always, to Erin's point, the caution around how do you continue to cultivate your listener support, sustainably in order to maintain it, because they are looking at moving offices. They're located downtown. So that's for them in terms of collaboration as well. And this is one of those things that it's kind of mentioned in here, but it's worth pulling out more, is their current offices is co-located with the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance. It's in the Loft Theater. We're Human Races. So they have physical collaboration with organizations that they then programmatically collaborate with in order to kind of act as a sounding horn for a lot of those entities. So it really gives them an interesting niche. And they just expanded to Wittenberg, I think it was. So that even elevates, how broad their reach is. And I think, that's interesting to note too, just based on what is the cost of expanding the reach of a radio station, if you think about towers and all those things. So that was really interesting to hear. I do agree with the, I'm going to put it more in the innovation category in talking about the digitizing, which is good if you think about how long do our CDs last in terms of scratching and all that stuff, right? Like that's something that needs to happen. But I think with innovation, how does the organization think about that even deeper beyond those things? I know it's really challenging as you think about, classical music is by nature old. And you're trying to broaden your audience. And so then how do you bridge some of those things with some innovative, whether it's programming or things like that, that is a challenge. Another thing that brought out, it's mentioned in the application, but it was really, I felt like an aha moment when speaking with them, was their youth programs. Had no idea, and I've known about this organization and worked with them over the years, but I totally had no idea about their instrument drive, how big it was or is. And so that came out in that conversation. Also, their annual event that COVID kind of, impacted. But the students that go through their that program who've won have I'm trying to remember, and Era might remember better than me. They've had national audience, like they've gone out of the Dayton community. They've done some big things. So, and then the last thing, promise I'll stop. The strategic communication plan that was submitted is old, and it's mentioned that it's old in the application itself. It's done by a third party, and they talked about how they're going to hone those goals, but I do encourage them to think about a refresh. Again, repeat theme here, but we're they're looking at moving offices, they're growing. So I think it's probably, it would benefit them to think about doing that again and giving it a new time frame.
I'm glad that you have repeat themes. Oh, excuse me, that you hit, Rachel, because sometimes I feel like I'm always commenting on the same thing. So we all have our areas of expertise, right? I don't have a lot to add here. I think the what my previous panelists have said, PPs, has been on point. I had a couple of I noticed that their diversity statement was from 2005 and has not been updated. And so maybe that's a typo. I don't know. But that was like, oh, I feel like a lot has happened since 2005 in terms of diversity and inclusion. And probably that needs a refresh. Also, it's almost 20 years old. And that, is certainly something that just needs some more updating. So, and I think that was reflected in some of the other comments that have been made and sort of how that's playing out then and what the activities and programming that we're seeing from the organization are. The budget, so they make a big point about talking how they haven't operated with debt. I have different feelings about debt than some other folks do. I think debt can actually be really smart at times. But that aside, I can understand their commitment to wanting to operate without one. It certainly makes fundraising from individual donors a whole lot easier if you tell them that their money isn't going to pay interest. But so they talk about how they operate with no debt, but then their budget for the year shows a deficit. And I don't know how they're going to cover that deficit because it's not explained. So I don't know if they're pulling from cash reserves and assets that they have. But also if you're operating at a deficit year after year, you know, at some point you're going to need some debt. So that just was a point that didn't connect for me within the application. When I looked at the numbers and I looked at the narratives, they didn't match up. And I think that's kind of, there were a couple other things, you know, they have a high asset amount. They own a lot of equipment. They own a lot of music. Their equipment that they've owned has been pretty fully depreciated, which says either they're going to, basically says they think they're going to need to replace it really soon. And I know they have invested in some capital funds to do that, but again, just not really clear. I was also really surprised to see that we're hearing about how they have to digitize their music collection because it's going to, you know, basically cease to function. But they're not depreciating that on their books at all. It's maintaining its value. And I don't know enough about accounting for music. I guess they still technically own the music, but if they can't access it, it doesn't seem like it's an asset. So again, just a couple of things that sort of just seem to be in a disjuncture between the narrative and some of the financial and other pieces, you know, other organizational pieces that we were presented, including that diversity statement. And, you know, so I think, you know, a reconciliation of those and further applications would really help strengthen their application. But they are very involved in the community. They are, you know, I think their artistic and cultural vibrancy is really high. I really appreciate the support that they are providing to other arts organizations in the area, whether it's broadcasting their concerts and shows, whether it's having them come in and do interviews. I mean, I think they're really bolstering the arts ecosystem in the area significantly overall, and I really value that about them.
Okay, thank you. Is there any additional dialogue? This one?
I have none.
You said you have none? Okay.
I have
okay.
I have one. It was just called to my attention that perhaps there was a mistake in how they filled out their budget form, which maybe makes what I just said about them having a deficit this year incorrect. However, it does go to support that some of their supporting documentation didn't match with what their narrative was, and that disjuncture is still there. So something to just keep an eye on in the future for them, I think.
Appreciate that, Erin. Thank you. Okay, we'll just take a few moments. Do you all need time to make any notes? Make any adjustments? Okay, hearing none, I think we will now take a break for lunch. So I'll turn it over to Karen, who is going to put up a screen for us to move into our lunch portion.
Yes, indeed. Thank you all. So this will be a longer break. We're going to give the panelists some time to get away, stretch, and refuel. So we will reconvene at 12:30. So attendees, you're welcome to sign off and come back, or you can just hang out. Panelists, I invite you to mute your microphones and videos, and we will see you at 12:30.
Thanks, Karen.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had a nice lunch and brain break. We're going to give it just another second to make sure all the panelists are back and settled in. And then Stacy, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, I think we're ready to go, Karen, are we? Okay, very well. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for your participation in today's meeting. We will resume the review of the applications. At this time, we are going to start the review of the community arts development applications. We will first be reviewing Bach Society of Dayton, and we will start with Rachel as the lead reviewer on that application.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. So a great way to sum up Bach Society is that it is a lean, mean organization. And what I mean by that is no full-time employees, no part-time employees, a lot of volunteer capacity, some contractors. So when you look at then the budget, so that's what I'll start with, is that you know, they have a really committed income foundation from their donors. You can see that in how they're projecting almost double what they've budgeted for the year. They have a very strong unrestricted cash base. And so what I would caution against is I was looking at the finances and from our financial review folks is that they have been operating at a bit of a loss. So would just caution against that. Again, they're not a big organization, so you know it's a small loss. It's just something to keep in mind. But very traditional organization, high caliber of performers. I watched one of their recent performances. You know, excellent caliber of folks they have there. Their evaluation survey, like we've seen from some of the other performing arts organizations, it's a very traditional survey. It's really helpful to gauge from the people who attend the performances what they thought about it. What I would encourage is, and maybe this is done, but it wasn't indicated in the application, how do they collect public feedback or community feedback and things that would help inform them with their music selection, their venue, you know, some of the outreach activities that they do. So a little bit of a stronger need there. They obviously have a very strong Kettering tradition. So they talked about the children's choir, they perform in Kettering, you know, and then I mentioned the traditional kind of performances and organization. So when we look at then the innovation element of this organization, it wasn't, it's a very collaborative organization with a lot of the other arts organizations that they work with, but I would encourage it to think about innovation a little deeper. And this will go a little bit into my DEI comments as well, but under innovation, you know, they talked about some of their like Paul Laurence Dunbar performance and things like that. I would encourage as they think about even that, and Era mentioned this in one of our earlier discussions and talking about lived experience, right? So that's great that these types of performances are being integrated. This type of music is being integrated and it's being thought about, but how do you really, how is it lived experiences? How are you really bringing those influences into the organization itself? So again, back to the traditional theme that I think I'm having here now. They know who their audience is. You know, they've got a huge mailing list. If you think about, you know, what some other organizations would say about their email list, they have a large mailing list. So when they talk about trying to diversify their audiences, I question that a little bit. I think it's really challenging as you think about an organization based in such tradition. There was a lot in the strategic planning area about how do we better engage on social media and some of the more digital formats, but I'm not, I don't know, they did all mention that they're going to work with the Ullman Group on helping to diversify their audiences. So I think that's a really good, you know, note in there. So to that, they've had Dave Ramey assist them in their strategic planning, which is excellent. It's new, you know, which is also really good. So they're thinking about, you know, what does their organization look like post-COVID? How do they diversify their audiences, grow it? They just adopted their diversity and inclusion statement in 2022. I will say there was not necessarily a reflection of DEI with regards to their volunteers, their singers and things like that. Just a lot of focus on the audience. So I would also, at that point too, encourage them to think about deeper commitments to DEI, especially in mentioning that audience growth. High marks on collaboration again. And then the last thing to note, and this was noted both in the financial area, but also in the organization, a lot of they're committed to, I didn't see another location other than the Kettering Church. So that is both a pro and a con. You have a really great commitment to an in-kind service to have this place where they do performances, and there's not necessarily a cost that goes with it, but what would happen if that went away? What would they do after that? And I didn't necessarily see a plan for that or kind of any mention of it, because that may also be a limiting factor in terms of how they then diversify their audiences, because Kettering is very far away, so to speak, from, say, you know, West Dayton. So, you know, that, you know, it's just something to consider. But like I said, very high quality organization, amazing performances, high caliber individuals, both on their board and who their artistic direction. So just some things to think about. And I will leave it to my other panelists for their comments.
Before the other panelists go, thank you so much, Rachel. I want to make sure that I'm hearing the comments under, and I'm able to make those connections under artistic and cultural vibrancy, the impact and engagement and organizational capacity. So if you would lead your comments with that, I think that would be really helpful. I was able to follow you, Rachel.
I'll go ahead and jump in, Erin, if that's okay. So I think a lot of my questions really are around their diversity and strategic planning and thinking. You know, I'll reiterate, they are a very lean and well-run organization. They do rely a lot on volunteerism, and I'll come back to that. They are, you know, providing an artistic product that we don't have, you know, is important, and we don't have a lot of organizations in the area that are doing it. So I'm grateful for them for carrying that baton. I wonder, particularly as we're thinking of diversity and inclusion, and as the nonprofit sector in general is really starting to have some serious discussions around pay equity. And I wonder if they need to start at least exploring what it would look like to compensate their staff. I think we all appreciate that they're, you know, what they have done so far to date, but I think it's a discussion that's really important to have. What does the budget look like if they start paying staff? And I think, you know, the comment about the in-kind support of the church as a performance venue, what does the budget look like if they have to start paying for that? I think one of the things we all learned in the past couple of years is that having some of those kind of what happens if discussions before you get to them can be really helpful. I'm not necessarily saying I expect them to add, full-time staff in the next year or anything, but I think that is the way that things are starting to trend. And so I think starting to think about what that would look like for them would be really, really beneficial. And even just as a thought exercise, even if they're like, no, we're really committed to staying with our non-staff organization, at least they'll have explored what's behind that door. So I think that's an important thing that kind of rose to the top for me. I mean, there are people, if you're not paying people, there are people who cannot afford to come and play with you. That's just the basis of the matter. I think they are really trying to figure out how to diversify their audiences and programs. I don't think they have found the right recipe yet. They are based in they have Bach in their name, right? And I think they even say in the application, sometimes the feedback we get is just play Bach. I don't want to listen to anything else when they come. So that's something to kind of, try to navigate and work against. So far, all of their steps towards diversity and inclusion have been very race and ethnicity based. And those are not the only types of inclusion. There's also physical ability. There's different types of instrumentation. There's different types of music, as Aaron pointed to earlier. There are different types of music that come together and influence even classical music. So I think maybe zooming out on what they count as diversity could be really interesting. I think, Rachel also commented earlier about Kettering as a very specific location. They are very well known within that community, but what happens if they start to consider more rural audiences or even more urban audiences as compared to those suburban, right? That's another kind of diversity that I don't see them exploring and might actually prove more beneficial to them than just thinking in terms of race and ethnicity. And then I think, everything else looked pretty strong. Again, they are doing really remarkable things with the smaller budget. So I think that is definitely a strength of the organization.
Thanks. Erin, is there anything that you would add? We've got about 2 more minutes and I want to make sure that we're hitting those categories as well.
I'll go ahead and hit those categories then. Let's start with artistic and cultural vibrancy, and I'll just read through my comments. Beyond the innovative collaborations with such groups as Stivers and Central State University and many other diverse groups, the Bach Society, I think, has shown exceptional effort with outreach to younger aspiring composers with their competitions and other initiatives. I think the competition is brilliant, nothing like a little healthy competition to pull some people out that, otherwise would not bother to come out and engage. I think that's a really great initiative. Nice to have that anonymous donor that's able to provide that support. I'm not sure if it would exist otherwise, but currently it does exist. So that's a good thing. We'll just focus on the fact that it does exist. Community impact and engagement. The Bach Society appears to have put forth much effort in raising awareness for both Bach and the society in general by making sure there is significant outreach in various and diverse local organizations and institutions. I am curious to know what additional efforts have been made to grow, just like what she said earlier, what other efforts have been made to grow a more diverse audience in addition to the Paul Laurence Dunbar concert. I think it's great that they were involved with the Paul Laurence Dunbar 150th celebration, but what else, I saw that repeated a few times throughout the application, which means there's not much diversity to offer besides that. So that's, as much as I love Paul Laurence Dunbar and the nod to him, that's still quite limited. Briefly mentioned very briefly mentioned in like one line, was the influence of Asian culture on European-based music. To see more productions that educate in this realm, meaning outside influences, it seems like something that would be extremely impactful in raising diversity on all levels is, besides Bach, like how was Bach built? What other influences built Bach? Because Bach did not influence himself. So what other, elaborate more on how these Asian cultures, because I'm curious to know, I was curious in the one statement, and then that was the only mention of it, but how do you plan on bringing those other influences to light? And then finally, with regard to organizational capacity, the Bach Society has made a wise decision in hiring a contracted accountant to keep track of the financial bookkeeping. Also, having multiple streams of receiving revenue seems to have paid off, especially in lieu of them having a small organization recovering from COVID. And I think, and then I had like some final overall comments, but I don't really have to skip. Let me see, where is it? Overall, this work. Say what?
We're at 12:46, so if you could bring us home, Erin.
Yeah, I look forward to learning more about the influence on a broader scale, especially as it pertains to diversity of audience, performers, and donors.
Okay. Thanks, Erin. I know there's so much that we could say about any one of these organizations, so I hate it. Got to pull you all in. Okay, I'm going to move next on to the Contemporary Dayton, and Era will lead us in that discussion.
I will. I'm in a little bit of the post-lunch coma, so give me just a second. So the Contemporary Dayton, I think is overall as an organization that, and this speaks across the board. I know we were asked to sort of talk about the individual criteria, but I think in all of the areas, one of the things that I was really ran through their application was a thread for me is that they are responding to the changing world around them, and really using that to drive what they're doing. And that's in everything from their artistic quality to their operations to their finances. So I think any organization that is being that responsive to the community, I always think has a lot to offer to that community. So I want to commend them for that. I think part of that is, even though it's been several years, is reflective in their name change. I think, you know, they identified that they really do want to be seen as a contemporary organization. I think, and that also wisely positions them in reflection to some of the other organizations, right? We just talked about the Bach Society, and that name in itself is indicative that we're looking back, right, centuries. But the Contemporary Dayton, the Co, is very much interested in being in the present moment. And again, that sort of is something that I see overall across the different sections. So I think I like the turn towards trying to include as many visual forms in their galleries as possible. I was able to see one of their shows, and there was a lot of collage work. There was also some video work. There was some painting. So I think I always appreciate that organizations that are trying to bring in artists working in different, oh, see, now I'm stuck on media or mediums because it's post-lunch, whichever it is, to put together a show, because it's always more interesting as an audience member, and I think as an artist too, to be juxtaposed with somebody and see how those forms are speaking to each other and how some of the themes are maybe represented in different styles and different mediums, instead of being more homogenous. So I also applaud them for that. And that, I think, speaks to their artistic, cultural, and vibrancy. I like the balance that they're striking between supporting local artists and between bringing artists from outside of the community into the community for people to see. Unfortunately, people living in Dayton, it is not always easy for us to travel to larger metropolitan areas to see art. And so I really appreciate any of our organizations, we mentioned Human Race earlier, that are bringing those things to the community. So I really appreciate that. But they're also not just operating at that. We're bringing in people from New York or wherever. They are also giving voice to some of the local artists. So I appreciate that a lot. Let me see if there was anything else. I think they sort of checked all the, and from like an application standpoint, particularly when we're looking at the engagement and impact and organizational capacity, they checked a lot of boxes. They mentioned a lot of things that we want to look for, assessment and marketing, how they're implementing and evaluating. And granted, these questions don't have a lot of room for a lot of information, but I could have used some more specifics instead of just sort of some, blanket statements. It's not as bad as, yes, we evaluate things, moving on, but I would have liked, again, just an example here and there to really kind of help me see how some of these things are playing out. They have really responsible, that's the wrong word, really qualified people running the organization, both from a business standpoint and from an art standpoint. So I applaud them for that. Their print materials are really nice. When I was at the gallery, I picked up little gallery guides. They were really informative, really well done. And so I also commend them for that. That's not always an easy thing to pull together. I think the one sort of question that I had in terms of their artistic and cultural work was, where is the joy? I didn't see a lot of joy in what they were presenting. I saw a lot of trauma, and I'm not, I think people need to make and seek out art that they need in the moment. And so I'm not above art coming from trauma and helping to address trauma. But I also think one of the tendencies we are having in this cultural moment is to reflect a lot on that trauma and not focus on some of the joy. And so that to me was something that was missing both in the exhibits itself, but also kind of in the application as they were talking about their programming. So that is my final comment.
Sure, I've just got, I want to make sure that you all are going to ding me on this. I just want to make sure that ties back to one of those three categories as well.
Yeah, so that's to me is in the artistic and cultural vibrancy.
Gotcha.
Portion.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other panelists?
Sure, I'll chime in. I'll start with the categories, artistic and cultural vibrancy. The co-DVAC has demonstrated that they are quite serious about their desire to impact all, within the entire community. Shh, sorry. My bad. Their exhibitions are very sensitive to the diversity of artists and the various styles and perspectives, as well as to the needs of the community to gain a holistic and engaging body of exhibits. Worldviews and perspectives are clearly significant to DVAC. And I've witnessed that several times, even before they moved, definitely before and after they changed their name, lots of sensitivity to many perspectives. I noticed quite often that there are local artists exhibiting there, but then I noticed a couple of artists that were brought in that were also present in Art Basel. So that really speaks to the high quality amount of artists that are often selected and brought into DVAC. To see some of those same artists present in Art Basel was a really phenomenal thing, specifically for me to notice. Going to community impact and engagement, they've shown many times through such exhibitions as the Friends of DVAC, the Member Show, and through such exhibitions as the Regional Student Exhibition, the Community Collaborative Exhibition, for example, the one where the certain members were invited to exhibit alongside local college students. It speaks a lot to their community impact. I think it's really smart to have multiple shows going on in one venue, that it's really difficult to not serve a broad range of audiences when you've got like 3 different exhibitions going on in one space. That really, I think it does a good job of making sure that there's a lot of diversity on many levels. And I'll say, while DBAC has produced sound evidence of their fiscal planning and responsibilities, it would help to also create a basic, visible strategic plan that can be viewed and shared by those who might require it, but mainly for their own usage. I did want to answer real quick the question of where is the joy? I totally get where you're coming from with that, Era. And I would say that I have experienced the joy of DBAC through such things as the local annual auction fundraiser. There's a lot of joy present there, lots and lots of joy present through their annual fundraiser. It doesn't really speak specifically to social justice so much as it is bringing in quality work from the local community that they too can come and experience and enjoy as well. So I would say that that's probably where the joy aspect is of it, is with the annual fundraiser that they have. It's not heavy on the social justice like it is with many of the other exhibits, if that helps. I'll digress.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that because, obviously I'm working from the, a limited material. So I appreciate that perspective. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, and I'll piggyback on that. And I know, Stacy, we're short on time, so I'll be brief, and this is in regards to the cultural vibe or the artistic vibrancy comment as well, building on that, is that the Contemporary provides us with a very modern experience for art. I mean, when I used to live in Seattle, and the first place I went was the Museum of Modern Art. And so the code for us is that Museum of Modern Art. It offers not only a variety of mediums, but a variety of expression. And that's where I see the joy. And how people are expressing themselves. They have they do a really good job of emphasizing, not just thinking about the art itself, but the people who are producing it and making sure that they're pulling from a variety of regions, a variety of artists, and different backgrounds and things like that. So high marks there. Even in thinking, I remember I heard a conversation on NPR from an artist, and lo and behold, when I went to look at the artist talks, right there, one of their artist talks was that. So you have a nationally interviewed artist who's going to do an artist talk at the Co. So that was really exciting. And they're, like I said, I mean, if you think about like videos as an artistic medium and the way that they portray it, it provides a very different experience here in this region that you only find in big cities. They are at the heart of Dayton in the arcade. So I think their collaboration is only going to grow from there. They already have a strong collaboration with other organizations. I think Aaron said this, but I'll be more explicit. There was no strategic plan attached. So while I could see elements of that throughout the application, I didn't, in terms of timing or whether it's new or old, wasn't able to evaluate that. With their evaluation, it's a traditional survey. You came to our program. What did you think? I would like to see a more impactful type of evaluation. And last but not least, I think this is just being more explicit, but their current year, they're projecting a significant shortfall, and they have a lot of restricted assets. So while they're doing fairly well, it's just kind of a red flag that popped out a little bit as I was kind of going through that. But overall, strong organization, very vibrant, and very central to our community.
Thank you. Hey, we are right at 12:59, so you brought us right to 1 minute from the hour, Rachel. Thank you. Okay. I think this concludes the review of the applications at this time. Karen, do I turn it over to you at this point?
You do. Thank you so much, Stacy.
Thank you.
All right, so members of the general public, applicants who tuned in, at this time, we are going to wrap up the public portion of the meeting and enter a closed session. Again, you notice this meeting has been recorded, so the recording of the discussions will be available on the CultureWorks website within the next few days. Within a week of today's meeting, you'll receive your average panel score by email. And then in early July, CultureWorks leadership will reach out to each applicant to discuss next steps and schedule a meeting with each applicant to discuss the awards process. So more on the horizon. But for now, I'd like to give members of the public just a moment to sign off, and panelists, if you'd hang out with me for a few more minutes.